Welcome my friends, to Short Story Theatre. This is your host Basil, inviting you to put on a sweater, and maybe a pair of gloves, or mittens. For today's episode takes you to the very top of the Northeast United States. To the sparsely populated St. John Valley, at the very crest of the state of Maine, some 200 miles northeast of Montreal, Canada. You'll live the life of a fur trapper and a farmer in an area that sometimes gets a snowfall measured in yards, not feet, and where the temperature can drop to 30 below zero, with gale force winds. Come along now and listen to Bill Russo's short story, Joubert, the Wolf Catcher.
As late September became early October, the vast wilderness in the 48 United States began dressing for winter. Bulky pines, 100 feet tall, held strong against the cold, but the maples, elms, oaks and such, quickly surrendered their motley-colored leaves to the icy grip of autumn's frosty fingers. The raging Allagash and St. John rivers, swollen from late summer rains and further gorged by the melting from an early snowfall from Quebec province, 200 miles due southwest, formed an impassable border between northern Maine and Canada's maritime province, New Brunswick. Very few people live in this mainly deserted area, a place the locals call simply, the county, Aroostook County, the uppermost part of Maine. It's not just the biggest county in the state of Maine, it's one of the largest in all the 48. How big is it? It's so massive that you could tuck all of Rhode Island and Connecticut inside it and still have room left over for a couple of Indian reservations. François Joubert knew about the reservations from stories his mother told. She was half Wampanoag, a Native American tribe best known for helping the Pilgrims of the Plymouth colony survive their first winter in what the invaders called the New World. In little more than a generation, most of the men, women, and children of the tribe were killed off or sold into slavery by the Europeans during the expansion of their settlements from Plymouth into Boston and beyond. Some few fortunate strays, including his mother's ancestors, made it safely to Maine, which at the time was a distant outpost of Massachusetts. His father was a mix of French-Canadian and Maine-Arcadian, part of a small band of people who lived on either side of the border between Canada and the U.S. They were dual citizens who really didn't consider themselves residents of either nation, but simply inhabitants of their own unique area, the region surrounding the St. John River. As a young man, Joubert spent time in the Canadian cities of Montreal, Edmundston, and Halifax, before drifting back into Maine. He journeyed all the way down to Bangor, before heading back north, skirting the border in the towns of Madawaska and Fort Kent. He was drawn to the solitude of the dense wilderness of the Allagash country. It's a massive unincorporated area south and west of Fort Kent, the last town before the area gives way to untouched forests that look the same as they did the year Columbus stumbled into America. The region, devoid of a single village, is inhabited only by trappers, hunters, fishermen, loggers, and a handful of farmers. Joubert claimed and cleared a few acres of land near a small pond, built a sturdy log home, and began farming the one crop that loves the frigid Maine climate and its rocky soil, potatoes. To augment his income as well as his larder, he began hunting and trapping. Moose, deer, bear and smaller animals were plentiful. He never really got commercially involved in these pursuits, mostly just taking what his own needs dictated. With his first harvest loaded on a horse-drawn wagon, François Joubert made his way to Madawaska, the northernmost city in the United States. A pretty village consisting of one main street and a dozen smaller side streets, it's perched on the American side of the St. John River at the peak of the state across from the Canadian city of Edmundston, New Brunswick. A cooperative bought his harvested spuds, and put them on a train with those of other farmers and railed them 500 miles down to Boston, where they'd find fame on grocers' shelves all around the nation as Maine potatoes. During the winter season, with its short days of sub-zero temperatures and snowfalls often counted in yards instead of feet and inches, the young farmer concentrated on improving his holdings. He finished construction of a barn that he framed and roofed before the first ice and snow. Inside the cabin, he laid a wooden floor and crafted shelving for his walls, a bureau with 4 large and 2 small drawers, and even a bookcase. Inside the log house, a warm fire burned steadily 24 hours a day, with wood taken from the mountain of logs laboriously cut and split in the odd moments between the various other jobs the farm required. Nights after supper were also reserved for chopping and splitting. In an area where the temperature in January and February can easily drop to 10, 20, or even 30 below zero, having an ample supply of firewood is the difference between life and death. Joubert started stacking the firewood against the side of the house to the left of his front door. He made a pile of split logs 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. Within a week the stack resembled a railroad boxcar built entirely of logs. In a month, the thick pile had the appearance of a wooden train snaking around the front of the house and hugging the side and rear walls until it nearly reached the back door. By the end of August the whole cabin was surrounded by a stack of split logs that ended up being 6 feet wide as well as 6 feet high. You could barely see the cabin for the great wall of wood. In mid-September the fireplace had eaten its way through the entire section from the front door to the east side of the cabin. The supply on the left side lasted until Columbus Day when the first big snowfall came. Joubert was concerned. About 1/4 of his firewood was gone with 4 months to go until March. When the weather allowed, he gathered and split as much additional wood as he could. As he crossed the weeks off the calendar, the wooden wall of firewood became increasingly smaller, yet when March came, he happily found that he still had about 10 feet of fuel left. By May or June every spring, Joubert set out for town to trade hides for supplies. It was on one of these trips, just before his 4th harvest, he met Jolene Bouvier. A tiny lady of slightly less than 5 feet, she had shiny black hair that curled around her face like a beautiful onyx frame. She was light-skinned but had enormous black eyes, that hinted at an American Indian heritage similar to Joubert's. Her frame was generously filled, but not overly so. Just 18, she recently left an orphanage where she spent most of her life, and hired on as a clerk in Madawaska at Daigle's General Store on Maine, across from 5th Street. She wore a frilly white blouse, with a black skirt of the length dictated by the times, a few inches below the knee. Skirt hemlines had been going up rapidly in recent decades, rising from the floor to their present height in just 30 years. Though Joubert loved the way the lady was dressed, he had no idea of fashion. He merely knew that he had fallen in love, just like in the storybooks, at first sight. As for the way he looked, it was typical Maine farmer, consisting of dungarees, battered slouch hat, and a dark cotton shirt, with beat-up, ratty boots on his feet. He was fairly large for the times, almost 5 foot 9 inches tall, with a weight of about 160. His face was handsome, though his beard and mustache seriously needed looking after. The hair on his head was shaggy and unkempt. But Jolene saw through the haystack on his face and head, and spied the inside man. She liked what she detected. For Joubert, who had known few women, and Jolene, who had known even fewer men, it was indeed love from the get-go. They were married within 6 months of that first meeting, and were happy in the wilderness cabin. She worked hard inside, to make it the very best house possible. He labored hard outside, to make the farm as bountiful as it could be. Things were going well, until he took Jolene along with him when he went trapping. She wept, at the agonizing sight of a wolf cub, desperately trying to free himself from the sharp steel teeth of a trap. His leg bled profusely from the trap, as well as from his trying to gnaw it off, to gain freedom. Jolene pleaded with Francois to release the pup, giving it the name, Little One. Joubert did even better. To her delight, he took the young wolf home, and kept it in the house, treating it like a puppy dog while it healed, and for some time afterwards, until it got near its full growth. When Little One was almost an adult, Francois put a scarf-like expandable collar around its neck. The collar would grow as the animal did. Joubert and Jolene released their 4-pawed pal in deep woods, 3 miles from their log house. For months afterwards the wolf returned home every day or two. Upon spying him in the yard, happily the Joubert dashed outside with their hands full of treats. Little One, growing strong and bulky, came right up to them, ate from their hands, and played just like when he was a puppy. Finally the wolf came no more, and they were sad but speculated he probably found a mate and made a new life. Jolene pleaded with Francois to promise that he would never trap another animal. He consented, and did even more. 1 day a week, usually on a Sunday, he tramped for miles to rescue unfortunate creatures caught in snares. Many times he found and freed foxes, deer, and other animals. Whenever he came upon an entrapped young wolf, he put one of his flexible, red and yellow scarf collars on it, just like the one that Little One wore. Afterwards he'd bring the pup home to Jolene, who was always excited to have a new foster child to care for until it got big enough to be sent back to the forest. The farm was prosperous, and doing so well that a sizable stack of currency accumulated in their account at the Aroostook County National Bank. Their output was always the most spuds per acre of any farm in Maine, and they received the highest prices at the potato co-op. One thing marred their happiness: they didn't have children. The doctor in Madawaska tested them, and confirmed what they already knew: they couldn't have kids. Francois was not capable of planting a child seed, and even if he were, Jolene would not have been able to grow it. Saddened but not bogged down by self-pity, Jolene suggested that they adopt a child. After being abandoned at age 5 by her mother, Jolene spent 13 years in the orphanage. She told Francois of the pain of adoption showcase days.
Jolene, I don't get what you mean. What is adoption showcase days?
It was horrible, Francois. It was a once-a-week thing, when prospective parents came to the home, to look at the children, who are paraded, in front of them. The people ask questions. All the kids hope to be the one selected for a new home, but only the funniest, cutest, or youngest get picked. I went through this 50 times a year, without ever being chosen. When I was 13, and starting to become a woman, the men began to take an interest in me, and I got scared. It seemed like I was going to be adopted, but for the wrong reasons. After a few of these uncomfortable interviews, I refused to participate in them anymore.
How did they react when you told them you wouldn't be involved anymore? Did they try to force you to? Did the people at the orphanage threaten you?
Yes, they tried punishment, and that didn't work. I still refused. Then, they tried bribery. They said they would give me things. Dresses, special privileges, even money, if I would agree to the presentation showcase. I still declined. As soon as I turned 18, and was legally able to do so, I left that horrid place.
To fill their desires to have a child of their own, Francois and Jolene decided to adopt. They went to the village and filled out all the paperwork. They were told that it seemed like they would be wonderful parents, and should be quickly approved. Francois and Jolene went home and waited. In the winter, only a few weeks before they were scheduled for final approval, Jolene came down with a fever. She was dizzy, and her face was sunburn red. The fever shot up higher. Confused and barely conscious, she was losing ground fast. Francois bundled her up and took her by horse and buggy 50 miles east, to Fort Kent, the nearest settlement. He got her to the doctor's office. But there was nothing to be done. Within a day, she succumbed to some kind of a flu bug. Being that it was midwinter in an area where the record low temperature is 41 degrees below zero, there could be no burials until spring because of the frozen ground. The doctor informed Francois that he would put Jolene's body in a barn that served as a morgue storage area. Already, there were 4 or 5 others inside, who had died earlier that winter and who also were awaiting burial in the warm season.
No. No, doctor. Never. My wife is not going to spend the winter in there. I'll take her back with me.
He did it. Francois brought her home and gently placed her on the couch in the living room. He wanted to keep her for a while longer, so he didn't build a fire.
It's cold tonight. It's 17 degrees in the house. But that's good, Jolene. It means I can keep you here, right by my side. God help me, dear. I don't want to let go.
Although he was out of his mind with grief, in a few days Francois realized that he had to put Jolene in the barn, until the passing of the cold season. Reluctantly he dressed her in her prettiest outfit, and kissed her frozen lips, one last time, before wrapping her in thick blankets. Finally he added a few layers of canvas, and lovingly placed his wife on a potato sorting table, in the rear of their barn. Months later, on a warm day in June, he buried her in the yard, behind the cabin. At the head of her grave, he set a headstone into the ground. Purchased in Portland, the marker was engraved with this inscription:
Here lies Jolene Bouvier Joubert. Born somewhere, place and time unknown. Died, right here, before she was barely grown. Loved by her husband, and everyone else she met. Never will I wed again. Jolene I'll never forget. Francois Joubert, her loving husband.
He was now alone, and yet poor Francois still set a place for Jolene at dinner every night. Speaking across the table to her empty chair, he said,
You'll be very proud of me this year, Jolene. The new crop is coming along even better than the last one. I pulled up a few sample potatoes today, and each one is perfect. It's going to be a great harvest.
It turned out even better. At Madawaska he beat his old record, selling his entire harvest for the highest prices ever given to a farmer from Aroostook County. After the sale, with little to do until spring, Francois devoted more time to the rescue of animals captured in traps. Though he'd be in serious peril if the trappers discovered him removing their catch, he walked the deep woods as far as 20 or 30 miles from his log house, just to set free a wounded deer, fox, wild hog, wolf, or even a bear or a moose. Winter always comes early in the northernmost part of the United States, but the first winter after Jolene's death, it came even sooner. Francois knew from the clouds in the sky that snow was coming. It's not uncommon, even in September or October, for the county to have a snowfall of a foot or more in just a few hours. Francois was 20 miles from home. In his arms, he held a newly rescued, badly wounded wolf pup. It appeared that the animal resting against his jacket had been in the trap for a long time. Besides the blood loss, the pup was further weakened by having had neither food nor water. It was barely alive. In the far north, night comes quickly in October, and Francois didn't want to try to start the trek back to the cabin on a night with a strong possibility of a blizzard. He found shelter under the branches of a stout pine tree. The lowest limbs were about 4 feet from the ground. The clear space beneath them afforded the best opportunity to wait out the weather. The storm began at twilight and plunged the temperature to near zero. The ear-splitting, howling wind picked up and battered the sturdy pine. Francois had his sleeping blankets, but fighting against the frigid temperatures and the gale-force winds was a losing battle. The snow raced down at the rate of an inch every 15 minutes, blasted into the ground by gusts of up to 60 miles per hour. By 11 p.m. more than a foot of snow had fallen. Sculpted by the wind, it drifted up as high as 5 feet around the tree. Becoming a solid white wall around the old pine, the snow formed an igloo of sorts, surrounding the lower branches. "We're in luck, little one," he said to the pup. "Nature has built us a snow fort. We're walled in, and it will get warmer in here now that we're not getting struck by that fierce wind. We'll be just fine. Let me get a bit of bacon out of my pack for you. You can have a little midnight snack before we try to sleep till morning." Francois watched the bright-eyed pup happily munch the bacon, and then close his eyes in a peaceful sleep. There was a noise in the distance. With a gloved hand he dug a small hole in the snow wall, and pushed an opening through. Clear sky and a glowing half-full moon lit up the area, making it as bright as morning twilight. The snow glistened like icing on a candled cake, revealing a beautiful landscape of frosty white, with green bumps where pines pushed through at irregular intervals. The racket was getting louder. At first it sounded like people, but soon he realized it was the din of desperate, baying wolves. Half-starved by the shortage of winter food, the always dangerous pack was made even more so by their ravenous hunger. The howling and growling of the approaching animals grew more intense. He could hear the pack leader barking orders. The pack listened to the yelps of their commander, and responded with eerie howls of their own that gained in volume as the beasts came within 100 yards of the hiding place of Joubert and Little One.
"They smell us, little one, they're coming for us. You are frightened and so am I, little one. Back before I met Jolene I always traveled with my rifle and pistol. I stopped using weapons. Jolene made me realize I don't want to hurt any living creature ever again. Little one, I still don't. But if I had a weapon, I could fire it in the air when they try to close in on us, and maybe that would scare them off."
The pack closed in for the kill. The leader plowed his way through the snow surrounding the thick branches of the sheltering tree. Once inside, the fierce creature slowly advanced on Francois. The huge wolf opened its mouth, revealing razor-sharp teeth powered by a jaw strong enough to snap a 2x4. A ray of moonlight danced across the neck and head of the ravenous wolf. Francois noticed something odd. He spotted a scarf-like collar around the wolf's neck. He couldn't be sure, but it looked like there were splashes of red and yellow.
Red and yellow. Just like the colors on the collar I put on that first wolf I rescued. The original Little One. Little One? Is it really you? It can't be.
Ready to lunge, the wolf froze, looking closely at Francois. It got so close, that he could feel the hot breath steaming out of the big animal's mouth. The big wolf sniffed him. Suddenly the wolf let out a squeal and a yelp, and began licking the face of Francois. "Little one, it is you. It's so good to see you," shouted a shocked and happy Francois. He began patting the big wolf and scratching him under his chin just like when he was a puppy. The rest of the pack jammed into that space between the ground and the lowermost branches. Under a signal from Little One, they all huddled closely around Francois and the new Little One, keeping them warm and safe until morning, when the sun lifted the temperature above freezing. By the light of day, Francois could see that two other wolves, younger than the original Little One, also wore red and yellow collars. They too were the product of his rescue efforts, and happily joined the original Little One in a session of nuzzling and chin scratching with their old pal. Francois took his supply of ham and bacon from his pack, and happily shared it with his friends. After they ate, Francois said to the original Little One, "Take me home, old friend." With Little One leading the way, the pack formed a column of two, and began marching towards Francois' cabin. There were 15 wolves in Little One's pack, and they acted like a plow pushing aside the heavy snow, and making a clear path for Francois and the newest Little One, still cradled in his arms. The long, furry column with Little One at the head and Francois at the tail, moved quickly, reaching the farm shortly before dark. Francois threw open the cabin door and invited the entire pack inside, where he spread plates and cups all over the floor, filling them with food and water. The wolves ate heartily and much more civilly than might be expected. After the meal he set a roaring blaze in the hearth, and the entire pack, as well as Francois and the new Little One, stretched out in front of the fire and slept soundly through the night. In the morning Francois fed the wolves again, heaping the dishes full of beef, ham, spuds, and bacon. After the morning meal the original Little One got up on his back feet, and put his front paws on Francois' shoulder. Stretched out like that, he was so large that he towered over Francois by nearly a foot. Little One licked Francois' face for several seconds, then gave a short bark which brought the pack to attention. With a final nuzzle, the shaggy canine headed for the door. Francois opened it, and patted each and every wolf as they filed through and headed back to their range. "Come back in about 6 months, Little One," he shouted as they ran off in the distance. "By then, the new Little One will be big enough to join your pack."
And so closes Joubert, the wolf catcher. Though the story was set in the early part of the last century, if you ever manage to get to the top of Maine, you will discover that the wilderness of Francois Joubert still exists, not far from the tiny cities of Madawaska and Fort Kent. You will happily note that moose, elk, deer, and the wolves of the Allagash Wilderness still outnumber the humans. One more thing. In the stillness of night, you will hear something else. If you have enjoyed Bill Russo's short story theater, please like it, and share it. And most importantly of all, this is Basil asking you to, please come back again, real soon, won't you?